bring then the vision that we talked about this morning it will actually come as kind of a report from the visionary prayer team as well. And the visionary prayer team, find my notes, was charged 2 years ago. Where'd we go? I'll read a portion of it. Their responsibility was to meet together to pray on a regular basis and pray daily for God's direction, and to seek God through prayer, His Word, wise counsel, and understanding the church's unique spiritual markers. After the team has received direction from the Lord, the team will be responsible for presenting that to the church. God has... Over the past several months, over the past several weeks, I'll narrow it down. I believe that the Lord has given us clarity and direction on a vision for the church body to help press us forward. Today, I'm not here to give you numbers, to give you drawings, blueprints, or those kind of things, because we're not there yet. I'm here to share what God has placed on my heart as your pastor and has been affirmed by the visionary prayer team as they have sought the Lord over the last 2 years and kind of brought them to a culmination. It's been affirmed by the staff as a whole. Kevin and Zach are not in here tonight because they're serving with our children. They asked, do we need to be in there? And I said, hey, go ahead and take care of the kids. If we need you, we'll send for you. Let me just kind of lay out very quickly a little bit of history and then tell you where I believe we are as a church body. In 1978, the Lord was moving, back in the mid to late 1970s, God was moving mightily in this church. 1978, God led the church to complete this building. At that time, the Lord had given First Baptist Church Watauga a vision to build a worship center. This was to be a temporary meeting place to serve as a dual purpose until the church built that place of worship that would replace what they had been meeting in for worship up to that time, which is what we know now as the chapel. And there's drawings for that, and they had floor plans and all kinds of things. Over the years, some things, just the church went through some tough times. And I don't want to reflect on all of that because Moses is dead. Okay? What's in the past, what was in the desert, what was during those tough times, that's over with, okay? Moses is dead, and God has a vision and direction for us as a church to move forward. But see, it doesn't end there. In the mid-1990s, God had moved through this church to pay off its debt, that was on some of these facilities, and get it paid off, and put in the heart of the church again to go ahead and move forward to plan to build a worship facility. And once again, went through some difficulties, some tough times, and the church at that time, in the early 2000s, the pastor who was leading through that left. And once again, I don't want to camp on that because Moses is dead. We don't have to worry about what was going on back there. We have to ask the question what God is calling for us to do now. Interestingly, in the meantime, as the church was going through some difficulty, before I came as pastor, there was a leadership team that God had the church had put in place called a transition team that was leading the church. And that transition team believed at that time in 2004, even though they were without a pastor, to go ahead and move forward with a portion of those plans. The church originally had plans to do some phase 1, phase 2 was going to be build a new worship center, phase 3 was going to be to come back over here and take care of some of this property that was needing some attention. This room, for those of you that weren't here, you wouldn't even know that in 2004 you could not meet in here on a Sunday evening during the summer. There was no insulation. There was no sheetrock up here. There was no insulation between because there was no sheetrock. There was a 1 1/4 inch piece of plywood with roofing on top of it, and that was it. And so the church budgeted every year for one of these air conditioner units to go out. They had to budget $10,000 because on average they were losing a unit a year. And the church wisely during this transition said, even though the church is struggling, we believe God has called us to provide vision for the church to continue moving the church forward. During that time, they remodeled in here. This was all brown paneling when I first started pastoring here. They lowered the ceiling, put in the new lighting, fixed some things in here, to the extent that we haven't had an air conditioner unit in here completely go out since then. Okay, in 11 years now. Oh, knock on wood, right? Now we had one fan go out up there, but Also at that time, the modern hallway that's out here and the glassed-in offices, all of that was done at the same time. All that was part of the vision to help continue moving the church forward. The hallway did look like the hallway directly above it. Paneled walls, orange chairs. It looked like the 70s, okay? And so in 2004, the transition team brought a vision to the church to go ahead and move the church forward in that area. But there was a question. I found something this week as I was seeking the Lord and seeking His direction, His confidence. I already felt like the Lord was moving us this direction. But I found something in the notes. Jimmy Uri was the moderator because he was leader of that transition team. And after they presented this vision to the church, they had a question and answer time. And here's a question that was asked. It says, this is in the minutes from that meeting, September the 26th of 2004. Is this going to affect our plans to ever build the new building? And the answer from the transition team was no. The whole thing about phase 3 was that we needed to make it because if the new building was going to be attached over here on the north side, the hallway needed to be modernized so that we could use these facilities for youth and education. The offices, the nursery, and the auditorium were all going to be in the new building. With all of that information, and many of y'all are new, you don't know the history of the church, you haven't walked through some of those processes, you hadn't been here during the good times and the ups and downs, and so all of that information I want to provide you for perspective, because I believe with all of my heart that God has spoken to this church for over 40 years and said, I'm going to provide a place for worship, a worship facility. The struggle that we've had in the visionary prayer team was, we can't. Our attendance doesn't justify it. Our finances don't justify it. We look around and, we fluctuate. We go up and down in attendance. But how can we justify going out and doing that? We can't. We can't. And yet, you can look at the trajectory of how God has spoken to the church, and it came down to me asking some hard questions over the last couple months. Did those people back in 1978, did they miss God? Did they say that God was telling them to plan for and move toward a worship center? The church in the 1990s, was God speaking to them or was He not? Because one of two things is either happening. Either God had spoken and we have been disobedient and wandered around in the desert for a while, or they were wrong, they didn't hear God in the first place. And that was one of the challenges as I've sought the Lord's direction, and the visionary prayer team has sought the Lord's direction over the last 2 years. I have come to the opinion, I believe, at this point with all of my heart, that God is calling us to set that vision on the horizon and say God is moving us that direction to build a place of worship. We are not supposed to be the Met. He's not called us to be Harvest. He has not called us to be something that we're not. God's called us to be First Baptist Church Watauga that meets the needs of our community. But I believe with all my heart that God is calling us that direction. I cannot stand here today and tell you God's called us to build the new worship center now. Because first, we have to step across the Jordan. And then we have to defeat Jericho. And then we have to take on Ai. And I believe that there are steps that God has for us to get from where we are to where we're going. But here's one of the cruxes of the problem that the visionary prayer teams run up against for the last 2 years. We've got some things in this facility that are desperately need to be taken care of. You walk down the aisle over here and you see the stains where stuff's been spilt or somebody threw up or it looked like, who knows what it looks like stuff happened in here. Because some of this hasn't been taken care of. And we've got a children's area that doesn't provide, as we look at it, the safest environment for our children to meet. It's not modern in its design. You can come into the children's area from 3 or 4 different directions, and there's some things that need to be taken care of to help us as a church move forward. And I believe that, but here's the problem. The question that has continued to come up was, do we pour hundreds of thousands of dollars into this facility or tens of thousands of dollars into this facility as though it's the only thing that we're going to ever have? Or do we say, we believe God's called us to eventually build a worship center, but to get there, we have to take care of what we have to help move us that direction. If God has had out on the horizon of this church since the 1970s, something that we have not fulfilled, I believe that we need to keep our eyes on the horizon and say, God's called us to go that direction eventually, but there's things that we have to do to get from here to there. That's going to include a handful of steps, and I don't even think I know all the steps that it's going to include. But let me give you what I think we need to work on now. First, we need to continue to focus on the unity that God's called us to in the body of Christ and take care of our membership. And what I mean by that is do a better job of making disciples so that when people join First Baptist Watauga, either by profession of faith, we talk about and we have a way to move them through a discipleship process that says this is what it means to be a church member. This is what the Lord's Supper truly means. This is what church discipline is. This is who we are as a body of believers. There's expectations that come with that. There's expectations of attendance. There's expectations of supporting the church. And that we as a church take that serious. Okay? And in doing that, what we have to do, and we've talked about it, I've put plans in place, and we've been working on it for months now. We have to go out to those missing church members that are on our roll somewhere and say, God has given us a vision at First Baptist Watauga to take care of our people like we haven't before and to move this church forward in this community. And we're wanting to know, do you feel God's calling you to still be a part of that? You know, you attended here in 1990, but you hadn't been here in 20 years. And try to bring back and recover those missing church members. This is a part of the overall vision. It's to press forward. I think to do that, our church is going to have to take seriously membership. We need a group of people that the church kind of brings alongside the staff to say they're going to be like a membership committee, bring some recommendations back to the church, and there may be some hard things that have to take place here. Because see, what happens is we have people that they don't know what it means to be a member. And we'll have people we've gone to talk to in the last couple months and say, you know, you haven't been here for a couple years, but, well, I've been going to this other church over here. Well, we believe God's calling us to take membership seriously. Well, but I want to stay on the roll. Okay? That's not what it means to be a part of a church family or a part of a church body. So First Baptist Church Watauga, we're going to have to come down and we're going to have to set some standards and say, you know what, if somebody hasn't been here in 2 years, they haven't tithed, they haven't given anything, you know, we don't check people's tithes, but there's no giving. Here's one of the reasons. We may have some little old lady over here in a nursing home that continues to feel a part of the church and sends her finances because she loves her church body. If she could be here, she'd be here. That person we're not removing from membership. We may have a student that's gone off into the Army. That person's not being removed from membership. But if somebody is down the road, they hadn't been here in 20 years, our church needs to be able to say, that's not what it means to be a part of the family of First Baptist Church Watauga, and so we're going to remove you from the church's membership. We're going to have to take that serious. That's a part of it. And if we don't have the heart to do that, then we're not serious about what it really means to be a family on mission. That's a part of the vision, and that's something that I'm going to be working on and bring back to the church. I may not wait till the next quarter. Bring back to the church to set up a membership committee to help come alongside and set some of these standards and bring them back to the church for recommendation. So fostering and bringing about that continued focus on we as a church family, and I've preached on it this year, I've been working on it this year. I said back at January that this was not going to be a one sermon series event. It wasn't going to be a short-term process. It was going to take years because we're talking about changing the culture of the church. It also means that we need to be willing to look at everything that we're doing, the ministries of the church, and put them on the table. That means, what if God says, I've got a better plan for you to make disciples for your children than Awana? We need to listen to what God has to say and say, you know what, we don't have to do Awanas even though we've done it for 8 or 9 years. What if God says, He leads us to say that we've got a better way to make disciples than the traditional Sunday school? I had somebody ask me, if we quit doing Sunday school like that, does that mean that we're no longer a Southern Baptist church? No. Now, before anybody goes crazy here, let me suggest something. I don't believe God's calling us to get rid of Sunday school or Awanas, but I'm using those as examples. We've got to have a heart to say, God's called us to make disciples. I preached this morning, He's called us to share the gospel. But the Great Commission, the command in the Great Commission is make disciples. You do it by sharing the gospel, winning them to the Lord, and baptizing them. So that's a part of what we're talking about. It also means that we need to go ahead and take serious going out and finding somebody who can help this church look at our facilities in a long-term way. And honestly, whether it's an architect or a building designer or a church consultant, somebody that can come and look and say, hey, here's what you have to work with. This is who God's called you to be in Watauga. Here's some things that I believe that make sense to help move you forward. Because honestly, I'm not an expert on what the best color of carpet is for the plan that we're looking at, okay? I'm not. Somebody may come and look at our children's hallway and say, look, here's what you can do that'll modernize it, give you some safety features. You might lose a room, you might lose some space, but you can do this or that. I'm not, in fact, there's nobody really here that is completely capable of doing it. I believe that we need to find that person, work through the convention or whoever we need to, and find that person that can come alongside us. We looked into this 3 years ago, and we dropped the ball, and it fell short, okay? We need to find that person that can come in and consult with the church and look at the overall picture and say, if this is where you feel God's calling you to go, here's some plans or here's some ideas of what you can look at. Now, that's going to cost some money. And so that's something that we as a church body need to pray about, where that money's going to come from, and we need to begin to look into that. But we don't even know right now, okay? There's some things on the board that I know that God's already laid on the heart of our building and grounds committee they've been working on. One of them is they know that something needs to be done with it. But here's one of the questions they had. Do we come back and put down the best carpet that we can? Do we come in and put a balcony and just say this is going to be our worship facility going forward forever and ever? Because if we weren't ever going to have on our mind a vision to build a worship center, then we're saying, okay, this is where we're going to stay, so what do we do best in here? I don't believe that's what God's calling us to do. So building and grounds is already said, but we've got to do something here. Well, if we know that God's calling us to move that direction in the future, then that means that we might, whatever changes we make in here, they might best be suited for when we have the worship center built, how's this best used for a education or fellowship hall? So whatever changes we make in here to take care of this facility now, have in mind the long-term picture. But if we don't have the long-term picture, we're just throwing money down the toilet, fixing a little thing here and a little thing there. And that's why we have to have that long-term picture. The children's hallway has to be addressed for aesthetics and for safety issues. Period. The floors in the children's hallway have been there for who knows how long. We did put carpet down, but we bought a cheap carpet knowing that it was a temporary solution until we got a report back from the visionary prayer team and had vision to move forward. And I would suggest that I think we would also have them look into, we've got one more area of the church that still looks like the 1970s. It's up there where the men meet, my Sunday school class meets with the paneling. And so I think that we need somebody to come in and that would take a big picture look at that and say, okay, if this is where you believe God's calling you as a church, this is how best to make some of these adjustments and move you forward. When we have that, I believe that God will create an excitement among His body and in this community, and He'll move the church forward. Let me give you two more things real quick. This week, I mentioned this to some of you. On Saturday, last Saturday, Veterans Day, I was at the Veterans Day memorial service, and I had Greg Vick, who is the city manager for the city of Watauga, come up to me, and he pulled me aside afterwards. He said, I just want you to know, me and the city of Watauga, he's representing the city, love you and Mike Love and the work that First Baptist Church and First United Methodist Church are doing in Watauga. Hey, can you imagine I had a city manager come tell me he loves what we're doing? And he said, I've got a concern, though. He said, because Mike has talked about their church is really struggling financially. And I said, well, Greg, we are too. And he said, wow, I can't believe that with all of the work that you're doing. And I think part of the reason is because we have not taken that step of faith and gone with the vision that God's called us to press toward. The second thing that's really been on my heart, there's a lot of things been on my heart. I'm scared to death, okay? I read Joshua 1 over and over and over, and God told me 3 times in there, be strong and courageous, for I'll be with you. I've gotten to a point where I'm not afraid for me. I'm not afraid for our church. I'm not afraid that God won't fulfill His vision. The only thing I'm afraid of is missing God. I don't want to be found disobedient and faithless. I don't want to miss Him. And I believe God's calling us to step out in faith and move forward with something that He had pointed this church toward back in probably 1975. It's been 40 years, nearly, if not 38, since this building was built. Zach, Wednesday night, when he was teaching the youth, he's teaching through the Gospel of John, and he got to the story of the lame guy at the pool of Bethsaida, and he's laying next to the pool, and the Scripture says that, he'd been there 38 years. And Jesus came, and they stirred the waters, and he was completely healed. Zach asked the question of the youth, and I think when he was preaching it hit him, and he brought it to the staff on Thursday morning. He said, "What if on the 37th year or 37 years, 200 days, that guy would have said, 'I'm done. I've been coming here 37 and a half years, and I've never been healed.' And he decided, 'I'm not going, I'm staying home today.'" He would have missed Jesus. My heart says, regardless of whatever's happened, Moses is dead. And God has a plan. And I pointed out for you in that passage in Joshua chapter 1, God gave them a vision for the end and told them, now stand up. Then cross over the Jordan. Then start walking through the steps, and every place that you take a step, I have given it to you. There's one other thing about that story that comes up later on in Joshua. 2 other things. They failed. 2 reasons. One, they got to a point where God had told them to go in and destroy all the inhabitants of the lands, and they got tricked by the Gibeonites. Over in Joshua chapter 9, there was a group of people who came up to them, and they said, "We came from a far and distant land, and our packs were worn, and their clothes were worn. They'd rubbed holes in their clothes, and their wineskins were torn. They said, we came from far away." You see, God had told them, anybody that's in your territory, you got to destroy. But if they come from far away, and so these guys, we've come from far away. And so the Israelites made a promise to them and made a pact with them. And there's a damning passage in verse 14 of Joshua chapter 9 where it says, they made a covenant with the Gibeonites because they did not seek the counsel of God. They were far into the promised land, still taking steps, and they decided at some point, hey, we've taken Jericho, we've taken Ai, we're cool. We don't need to pray anymore. So if anywhere along this process we cease to pray, and we cease to ask God for His direction and for His next step because we think we've gotten it made, we're going to fail. And you know what Israelites eventually did? Remember the promise in chapter 1 says that I've given you the land all the way to the Euphrates. I've given you land all the way down to Egypt. I've given you land all the way to the sea. Israel ended up occupying only 10% of the land that God had given them. Because what Israel did is they came into the promised land and said, we're tired of fighting. Distribute the land among us, and we'll just take what we have now. Israel today is still completely surrounded by all of those other enemies, because you know where the Euphrates River is? It's in the middle of Iraq. God said, I gave you that. You just have to, by faith, go there. And what they did is they got tired and they stayed where they were. It's easy to get to a point where we're comfortable and say, God, this is enough. We don't need any more. And when we do that in disobedience, we miss out on the blessing that God has for us and the promise that He set before His people. There you go. The visionary prayer team is unanimous. They believe that God is speaking through the staff and through their prayer time and through the pastor. Because of that, the visionary prayer team has completed the task that God has set before them. And they'll no longer be meeting. Now, that means that I told them, I said, if you 5 quit praying, I'm going to kill them. I probably wouldn't actually kill them, but I'd be really, really mad at them if they quit praying about it. I want to give y'all an opportunity just to voice any. We don't have numbers and we don't have those kind of things, so we're not taking a vote or anything like that. Is there anything that's on your heart? Anita is the chairperson that has served as the leader of the Visionary Prayer Team for 2 years. Anything that you'd like to share with the congregation at this point that the Lord's laid on your heart? She did not want to give a report tonight. She's scared to death.
I think you've covered it very well. First of all, I'd just like to say on behalf of all of our committee members, thank you for allowing us and giving us the honor and privilege of serving God and serving you in this capacity. For the past 2 years, God has been dealing with us mainly with spiritual building, not necessarily with physical building. First year, he led us to come to a time of confession and repentance and revival and renewal. And this year, he's been leading us in the direction of coming together as a family of prayer. And so as I look back, I think those 2 years have been in preparation for this time of beginning a new season, and we are ready to go forward to take the next step. I was sharing with the committee this afternoon that I went back to the Experiencing God material from ages ago. Some of you may have not even gone through Experiencing God, but went back to the section on crisis of belief. And so when you come to a time of moving forward or a time of change, you have to decide, are you going to go with God? Are you going to follow him? Or are you not? Well, we choose to follow God because we don't want to miss out on any of the blessings, and we certainly don't want to pay the consequences for not following him. So we thank you. So we believe that our season has ended, and we look forward to what God is going to do with us as a family on mission.
One of the immediate things is next steps. I've alluded to some already. Some of the next steps have already taken place. This year, you have probably noticed already that we've about doubled the number of fellowships that we've had as a church. And I believe that that's something that's crucial that God's called us to do moving forward, is to continue to even have more fellowships. For instance, this year when we do the children's musical, we're going to be doing a dinner on the grounds and holiday dinner. We're going to make it like a dinner theater. So we can come together, bring our potluck for the holiday dinner on December the 13th, and we'll turn the lights down as we get toward the end of our eating time, and we'll have the children put on the Christmas program. And so I'm excited about that. You know, we've already looked ahead. December the 31st, we're going to open the church up. We'll have fellowship time up here for that New Year's Eve time and celebration. If you want to come play dominoes or 42 or just fellowship with your church family and friends. So we're looking at intentionally doing things like that to help us continue to grow together as a family. The membership issue, I think it's time. I've taught on it enough. I've spent time with the deacons, and we've talked about it enough. I'm going to be going on a pastor's retreat in about 3 weeks. December, 4 weeks now, I guess, December the 15th through the 19th, I'm going to be going out to Ridgecrest, and I'm going to spend that time seeking the Lord's direction for my sermons for next year, but also for how we put together a membership committee and get some folks to come alongside and help with that, and then focusing, too, on continuing our outreach, especially outreach to lost and missing members. So those are some of the immediate next steps. We've got to continue as a church to focus on prayer. One of the things I forgot to say earlier, one of the questions I've been struggling with over the last few days, Lord, okay, I can trust you, right? You're a big God and you own all the cattle on 1,000 hills, and we can say all these things, but where are the resources going to come from? If God's calling us to move forward, where are those resources going to come from? And the Lord convicted my heart clearly with this. The resources are in the harvest. The resources are in the harvest. The resources are in those lost people in Watauga that we have yet to reach. And these represent, if you can see the title, Missing Members of First Baptist Church Watauga. They're right, many of them right here in Watauga. Many of them y'all know because they were your friends back in the 90s that went to church here that aren't going to church anywhere. And I believe that God is going to re-energize and revive His church body to reach those folks as well as the lost. And that's where the resources are going to come from. And when we take those initial steps of faith, we're going to know it. We're going to see God moving. My door is always open to. I know that some of you are going to have a lot of questions and a lot of concerns. And if you want to come talk to me one-on-one or come talk to Kevin or Zach, as a staff, we've been seeking God and passion through some things and praying about some things for a long time, besides what the Visionary Prayer Team is going to be doing. So feel free to come visit with us.